And here we are. Okay, so hi. This is a really, getting ready for this particular session has been an interesting experience because based on the presentation of numerical values that was presented last week in heavy detail, I actually received some comments from a couple of individuals regarding, like, is this truly what the Bible is actually presenting? So we're going to have to step back a second and actually look at what the purpose of this particular session is all about. So let me so just give me a second to get everything ready here. All it is. So remember, the title of this entire session, Bible study is called "The Bible Through the Eyes of the Scribes." And the scribes, if you don't know what the scribes actually did, they worked under very strenuous conditions in which they copied meticulously, word for word, what was actually what was written down, and they passed things on. And then over time, there were slight edits made in order to make these things more coherent. And so a very brief history lesson is these things started. There was so much scripture that people had to get through that they had to start ways of sequentially ordering things. And an example of this, for example, how we in our current Bibles distinguish it by 66 books. How did we get 66 distinct books? Well, I mean, you have the subject material and stuff like that. Well, how do you divide the sections within the books? And that was the whole process to where we currently today have the chapters and the verses that we know and love today. They had their own way. The ancients had their own way of presenting the chapters in the subsections and stuff like that. But when it comes to what we were talking about last week in terms of the counting of the verses, this process began very early on. And so what they did was they used Hebrew letters. There was let's just say so that way I don't have to go into the semantics of it all. S and P. They used these two letters to separate the books of the Bible, or the scrolls of the Bible. And so when they were inside of the scroll, they would use an S to designate I forget which one was which, but it was the S was the smaller. The P would be the subsections, and then you have an S that divided the subsections into further subsections. So there were already these. This is actually what eventually led to when you open up a Bible and you see subject headings. That's where we get many of those subject headings from. They didn't give them titles, but they did segment them into those subject headings. So what we put subject headings over. So that happens in most modern Bibles, where you'll have what's the content of what follows comes from. That's where those divisions came from. As time went on, then it was also the nitty-gritty work of distinguishing where the sentence structures were. And by the time you got to the Masoretic text, which is by and large the text that is used to translate from Hebrew into English, we mostly based it on the Masoretic text. It's actually the Masoretic text that I refer to when I'm studying Hebrew. They had a specific pronunciation pattern when it came to that's where you get the dots of the Hebrew vowel system. That's where you get certain cantillation marks. Cantillation was a way that people would almost chant, but in a very musical way, the scriptures. And so what the Masoretes did is they were in Tiberias, which led to the designation Tiberian Hebrew. They very meticulously placed vowels in every single word, and then towards the end of a phrase, they would shift the vowels, kind of in a way similar to intonation, so you know that this is a question when you raise your voice at the end. So can you understand me as I raise my voice at the end of a sentence? That little at the end of it is our version of designating when the end of a particular yes or no question can be. In a similar way, it's not exactly the same. I'm trying to really make it simple here. In a similar way, the Masoretic text shifts vowels at the end of a phrase, and to designate that more clearly, they used a colon. That would signify that this is the end of an important segment. You would also find cantillation marks around that final word. What do I mean by cantillation marks? What I'll do is, when we get to the interlinear passages of what we're studying today, I will point out the cantillation marks as well. Now, the Masoretes used these colons to designate the end of specific segments. So this is like subsections of subsections of subsections. This was the beginning of where we truly get the concept of verses from. And if you compare the number of colons to the number of verses in most chapters, they line up to the way that we designate verses today. So when I received a question such as like, well, do these verse countings actually have any weight? I made sure before we joined today that I checked every single place where I designated a verse and the importance of the numerical value of a verse. There was one mistake I made. For some strange reason, Exodus 14 does not line up. Towards the end of the chapter, the colons get separated from the designation of the verses that we have today. So if you remember right, and you can refer to the previous video if you should so wish, I mentioned Exodus 14:28, and that's actually not the 28th distinction. It's 14:29 is, but it actually makes the point I made about Exodus 14 even stronger. So it's funny that my mistake actually belittled the value of the verse in question. So if you remember right, if we go to Exodus 14, I was talking about the importance of the various verses. And in I'll just do it again. I'll go 7, 14, 21, and 29 now. So verse 7, we have, he took with him 600 of Egypt's best chariots along with the rest of the chariots of Egypt, each with its commander. Then in verse 14, you have, the Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. 21, then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all that night, turning the seabed into dry land. Verse 29, but the people of Israel had walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground, as the water stood up like a wall on both sides. And I think it kind of like makes the point a little bit stronger that I was making before, that like it kind of like was cohesive in those 4 verses. Now, of course, talking about like how it not a single one survived. That's also a very so hold on one second. Okay, cool. 1 second. Okay. Anyway, we did have the yeah. So it is interesting, the cohesion of all that stuff. Anyway, so.
I can.
Yes.
Are you saying then that the way the Hebrew was written and made verses out of, if you will, or paragraphs, that it should have been stopped on the 29th? It should have been the 29th. That what we have is verse 29 instead of 28?
So I'm missing your point.
You're saying you were adding 7 and 7 there, and you got 28. But are you saying, are the English versions wrong as far as the verses compared to the Hebrew original?
No. It's just the way that the English has actually ended up versing it. But the 28th colon happens at the end of verse 29. So that's
okay. So if it's the 28th colon at the end of 29, that would mean that 29 is really 28. In the
exactly.
That's what I'm asking.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm. All right. Exactly. So it is interesting when you, because they don't always line up. But I would say a majority of like the older texts, they do line up this way. And Masoretic texts did very much make use of that. So they made use of these colons. And then actually today we're going to see a little bit more of this number play. So it is interesting as far as that's concerned. So, all right, let's go ahead and see here. One second. All right, so let's go ahead here. Okay, now I do have interesting things to mention here. We're going to talk about the Feast of Weeks, which happened over the past weekend. And it is interesting, too, that the word for week in Hebrew is very much related to the number 7. The word for Sabbath is very much related to the number 7. How do you calculate the Feast of Sevens is by multiplying 7 times 7. And it's like, come on. Like, there's like a very big importance to that. Okay, so I made a couple of interesting discoveries as well when we were at the previous session. I often when we were in the previous session, we were in the prayer section of it all, of the ending, and I instantly was reminded of like looking into Exodus 16 and Exodus 27, and I was thinking, well, if the Ten Commandments are presented in the 70th chapter of Exodus, I wonder what the 66th chapter of the Bible. If the Ten Commandments were in the 20th chapter of Exodus, which is the 70th chapter of the Bible overall, I wonder what the 16th chapter of Genesis would be, which is 66, right? The 66th chapter. Well, if you turn to Exodus 16 and you count the number of colons slash verses, because they do line up here, there are 36 verses, which is quite clearly 6 times 6. If you look into the 27th chapter of Exodus, there are 21 colon slash verses, and it's just like multiplying 3 times 7, which would be the 77th chapter overall. If you think that there's not much of a connection between the 3 and 7, trust me, we're going to be talking about some more 3s and 7s today. So it's interesting how these different things really do come together. This all leads to the concept of this weird numerical thing, and I'm calling it weird because it's strange and foreign, like originally. So it is strange to me. This concept known as gematria. It's Gematria, gematria, which is actually recognized among scholars in terms of the importance of numbers in the Bible. There is a danger, though, that you go too far. An example of going too far is counting how many letters are between one word and another word, or like how many times you see a certain letter within one of the books of the Bible. That to me is way too far, because of the fact that you can't easily. There were slight variances that would have messed up that numerical pattern really quickly. Now, when you're talking about overall words, or counting the amount of words in a verse, that's much more sound and that's much more stable in terms of like how they view things. So when we're looking at the Ten Commandments, and there were 3 sections where they're divided by 3 sections divided by 7 words, so 3 times 7. This does happen. But you have to be very careful as well that you don't go off the deep end. So anyway, it is very. I think it's a very interesting thing there to consider overall. I wonder why I put that one there. I put Exodus 34 down for a reason, but we're not there yet. Let me just see what was going on there. I said 36. Oh, yeah. Not 36, 34. Oh, yeah, that's why. Never mind. I know why. So we'll come to that later. One thing I also wanted to make mention of as a review from last week is that the plunder of Egypt was not forceful. The plagues were, by all means. But when the Egyptians were sending the Israelites off, it was not forceful. They gave them the things that they requested. And I thought that was interesting because at that time they did trust the Lord. And it was, the Israelites did. So at that time, this is before they really started complaining. They complained once during the brick-making process, but when you're talking about their trust that they were being freed, it seemed that their full trust allowed them to plunder Egypt, but in a way that we're not used to plundering. And it's interesting that they were willing to give them like anything that they requested. So I also, during discussions with my family, actually, we're talking about how it's interesting that, and this is going to segue into what we're talking about today. It's funny that the Lord was so willing to destroy Moses over the fact of circumcision with his son, when Moses completely killed some grown man, not like 40 years prior, and that was okay. Of course, it wasn't okay, but like there was no death penalty from that one. But yeah, God was ready to destroy Moses because of the lack of circumcision of his son, and that's just an interesting oddity. And I did want to present that. So I did talk about the vowel insertions and verses. Okay. We're also going to talk a couple more things about the numbering process. Just to show you more about the concept of gematria, how they figure out numbers and stuff like that. So, Dad, you would know this. How many laws are there in the Torah?
Hold on, I got to get my mic up.
Okay.
611 or 613, depending on who's counting.
Yeah, and why? What's the difference between 611 and 613?
I'm not sure. I think some of them might have been duplicate or divided differently. I'm not sure.
There's massive debate.
I think the number. I think 613 is the more accurate as far as I understand it, but I don't. It's been so long, I don't remember.
Let's present it. It'll be interesting to go into detail a little bit on that. So, for anyone who does not know the concept of the Torah, don't worry, we will get there. But I think it's going to be interesting to present a couple of things. There is a major debate when it comes to how many laws there are in the Torah. There's a lot of repetitions. There's a lot of slight nuances. All these things are major facets and or contributing factors to the contention between how many verses there actually are. Not verses, laws. I'm mixing up my words, but you know what I mean. And 611, and why 611 is considered one of the popular ones, and there's actually a lot of writing done on this, and I'm going to, based on gematria, you have numerical values attached to words. And so I'm going to show you the number system here. So what you have are to write the word Torah, you have, I'm going to write it in print. I was going to write it in cursive, but I think it'll just be easier to write it in print. That's the T sound. This is a vowel marker. It's called a modulaciones. And then you have that, and then you have that. So this is like a T sound. This can be like an O sound. This can be like this is an R sound. And then this one is kind of like an H, or kind of like an extended ah, so we'll just say H, okay? And so what happens is actually, no, I'll just say this, W, just for a way to just simplify it, okay? This letter has a value of 400. And this letter has a value of 200. And this is the word for Torah, which we will get to later. And so you have the number here is valued at 6, and the number here is valued at 5. Add them all up, you get 611. And so this is gematria. This is absolutely 100% used in Scripture. We will get to this eventually, but the book of Matthew begins with the genealogy. Why are the 14 generations separating individuals important? I don't know that if you know that. Otherwise, I'll just go ahead and say why. There is a reason for that.
I want to just rewind for a second.
Gematria.
Can I ask you a question?
What?
Can
Yes.
I ask a question? On the number system in the Hebrew letters, is that like Roman numerals? As opposed to A being 1 and B being 2? You know how Roman numerals is?
Well, no, this is the thing. Hebrew numerals don't necessarily line up with gematria. So W in gematria can be like a higher number, and the H can be like a higher number based on gematria.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. I was just curious.
It is complicated. Gematria has slightly different nuances compared to the Roman numeral version of Hebrew. Okay, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
because if you have like a V and an I, that's a 6.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's similar, but gematria slightly alters this. I can actually. I don't
want to go off on a tangent, Phil. I was just curious because it looked an awful lot like it. That's all. I don't want to go off on a tangent.
Let's go ahead here. Hidden numerals. You can still see the screen, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if you come down here, you will see that the W in Hebrew numerals. Oh, it is. Oh, it actually is 6 and 5. Wait a second. There was something else I thought. I forget what it was. All right, never mind. But no, it actually does. The Hebrew numeral. Okay, I misspoke. See? Yeah, it is. So you're right, Dad. It is similar to the Roman numeral system, I guess you could say. How like a V and an I, or an M, or a D, or a C would have certain symbols. For example, 11 would be a Y and like the kind of like the A, but it's not really the A, but you know what I mean. So it is interesting how that does work out. And so you do have 611 here. And when you look at the 14, so Dad, would you know the meaning why 14 between generations was such a big deal?
No, except it seems like a nice round number.
It does seem like a nice round number. Matthew knew what he was doing. So these are 3 letters. This is hold on. I'm writing sloppily, but you'll understand what I'm doing. So this is a D. This is a D. And this is a W again. So remember, this had a value of 6, right? And this has a value of 4. And this has a value of 4. Equals 14. That's David's name. Yep. Same thing with Solomon. He has a numerical value of 375. There are 375 proverbs that are attested to Solomon in the book of Proverbs. So this absolutely is a thing. And it's so what's funny to me is that it seems too strange to us, but you have to remember too that in Babylon, numbers were big. And I was also talking about like with my family about like the concept of the Chaldeans being heavy into like number-based systems or the meaning of numbers. And it was surprising to me because if you remember, I was posing the question like, I don't understand what 8 has to do with anything. I don't understand why the number 8 was so important. And so I found an answer. So if you want to go with me on a little journey here, the gematria of Torah, we just looked at this, is 611. Its small gematria is 8. The gematria of the tetragrammaton is 26. The tetragrammaton is the name of the Lord, Yahweh. Its small gematria is 8. The gematria of the name of God indicating that He controls the world is 314. Its small gematria is 8. What is small gematria? What is 6 plus 1 plus 1? What is 2 plus 6? What is 3 plus 1 plus 4? The gematria of the word good is 17. Its small gematria is 8. So this is fascinating, but you can see it gets really complicated when you look at other things here. It's really, really a complicated system. And for the sake of simplicity in terms of, hold on, my computer's kind of like acting up. It is acting up. Okay, good. Oh, good. I just want to make sure everyone can still hear me because my computer just kind of freaked out for a second. So gematria is very complex, but there are certain things you can guarantee. And now we know the reason why 8 is such an important number. Yeah, so when you have the long form of a numerical value, just like in English, you can add the 3 consecutive the consecutive numbers and get a small gematria of a word. So once again, God's name, the word for Torah, the word for good, in like the controlling aspect of things, God's everlasting presence, all of them have a small gematria of 8. And that's why when we were looking at Genesis before, the number 8 kept popping up. And there was it's really interesting that this is actually really blowing my mind to think of how precise this is and how the scribes, in this sense, knew very well what they were doing when it came to the ordering of things like this. So I thought it was a really important, I just really wanted to bring that up. Okay, anyway. So when it comes to 613, it's debatable because there are two laws that are associated with the Torah. One is I am. That like I am the Lord. I am. It's considered a command. And the other thing is that Yahweh is one. We're going to come across this in Exodus 34, but I did want to present that that those two, which don't sound like commands to us or legal code, they inserted it into the legal code because it had value to them. And so you have, so that's where you get the 613. There's another reason why it was done too, and it was done on purpose, it seems, that the ones that say you should not do something, the number of that is 365. So when you look at how many laws say don't do something, 365. One law per each day of the year. And then you have 248 good laws, or do this laws. The 248 is also known to be indicative of how many body parts you have according to ancient texts. So 248 had to do with in the ancient context, the soul. So you have the days of the year in the soul, and it was no. When I say soul, I say that with a grain of salt. Like I mean the body, the physical aspect of who we are, and it's interesting. So it seems as if those two might have been inserted to meet that association. So what I'm saying is the very I guess you could say the human intricacies that are inserted. We were looking at how some numbers don't quite add up in certain instances. I don't think that was an overlooking aspect on a scribe's part. I don't think a scribe was overlooking something. This was very meticulous, and I'm only presenting small bits of it, just to show how crazy deep it can go. So if there are no questions, we'll go ahead and continue to the next subject before we go on. One thing I do want to mention, it does not happen in the texts that we are reading right now, but Egypt is also known for another name. The name is concordance number 7293, which we would say in English is Rahab. And that is an emblematic name used in Hebrew for the country, for the nation of Egypt. And this is also an indicative of great pride. The word has a sense of pride and arrogance, like absolute disdain or looking down on other nations. And that's how it's often portrayed. It appears 3 times in reference to Egypt, and it happens in the prophets. But since we're talking about Egypt and being drawn out of Egypt, one of the emblematic names given to Egypt in Hebrew scripture is Rahab. And it's interesting in that sense. So, all right. So think we're ready to continue. So we'll see where we'll go.
Question, can you pronounce that clearer,
yeah.
Joel? Was that Rahab you said?
Rahab, R-A-H-A-B. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
In Hebrew, in B, but yeah, it's
okay.
Rahab.
All right, Rahab. It didn't sound like a right name to me. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Rahab. If you want to write it down for a later reference, the concordance number is 7293.
Now, what did you say the other name for Egypt was, honey?
Rahab, R-A-H-A-B, Rahab.
Okay, that was it. Okay.
Yep, and there is debate on whether the name has anything to do with the god Ra. Although Rahab is tended to be looked at as a female. So it's interesting, the emblematic name used here. It only appears 3 times in Scripture, but it is something of note. So, cool.
Is it any relation to the woman named Rahab?
Well, I am actually, when I presented this, I didn't have time to look at it beforehand, but yes, I did think it was this, and I'm going to be looking into that when we get to Joshua, so don't worry. That's for you. I don't know. I'll look it up. I actually don't know that. So, but yeah, it is interesting. So, all right, so I think we're ready to continue to the next subject. Good. All right, so let's go ahead and keep it moving. So here we are. You got to understand one thing that the Bible is doing is playing with us in terms of Eden, the garden narrative. Gardens are very popular places for gods to dwell in terms of other cultures. Another very common feature, you find it practically everywhere, like in China, this was a huge thing when I was living there, is the concept of mountains being holy, because the higher you go, the closer you are to the heavens. And this is combined when it comes to like what Exodus is portraying as well. And you have the combination of the garden aspect and the mountain aspect. I'm going to steal a term from Tim Mackey here. The cosmic mountain is a very popular topic. And so another way to refer to a cosmic mountain is a high place. And this is so interesting. So you have a distinction here between Yahweh's high places versus the high places of other gods. And this, what we're going to start today is looking at the fight between God holding on to, I'm reading a book right now, like I didn't even expect to read this book, and it's really giving me some terminology that I can use, I guess you could say. But his inheritance, Yahweh looks at Israel as his firstborn, as the one that he has dominion over. And instead of all the other gods having dominion over their respective places, God's inheritance, the one that he chooses, is Israel. And this is where the whole battle scene starts to really take place. And so when you're talking about the cosmic mountain, this is where we're at in Exodus 21. We're on the cosmic mountain. Moses is before the Lord. Okay, so cosmic mountain. So in Exodus 21, which is where we left off, Exodus 21, slaves. So you have the 10 Commandments is the beginning really of like this implementation of a law code. It's a simple law code on the whole. And then the first discussion has to do with how you treat your slaves. But if you actually get into the nitty-gritty, God here is, I guess you could say, where it begins with a C and I keep forgetting it. He is compromising, that's the word. In terms of, he knows that the Israelites have slaves, but he compromises with them by like not allowing them to go as far as other nations do in terms of how they consider slaves. It's interesting here too. We're going to talk about the law. This is where the law, the legal code of the Torah is presented. You have to understand. Actually, I'll show this picture as we're discussing here, because this is a really big facet of. Oh, sorry. Hold on. I'm so sorry. Bible study lectures. There we go. And there we are. So to all who are watching, this is the Code of Hammurabi as presented in the Louvre today. And you can see the writing on here. This is a legal code. And up here, you have Hammurabi getting presented the godly dictation of the legal code. And it's really, really a fascinating thing, and it's very often cited when you are looking at it from, when you're looking at how ancient law was presented. And if you ever read the Code of Hammurabi, it basically starts by Hammurabi talking about how great it was that he was able to present to the human race what the gods decreed was good for mankind. Very boastful. I would definitely say that. It was actually very boastful. And when you compare Hammurabi to Moses, there's a distinct difference in terms of the humility aspect. So I would encourage anyone to go look up the beginning of the Code of Hammurabi. And, actually, I'll just do it right now and read it to you. It's really, you'll get the point in just a couple of lines. The Code of Hammurabi. Okay, so when Anu the Sublime, king of the Anunnaki, and Bel, the Lord of heaven and earth, who decreed the fate of the land, assigned to Marduk, or the overruling son of Ea, god of righteousness, dominion over earthly man, and made him great among the Agigi, they called Babylon by his illustrious name, made it great on earth, and founded an everlasting kingdom in it, whose foundations are laid so solidly as those of heaven and earth. Then Anu and Bel called by name me, Hammurabi, the exalted prince, who feared God, to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land, to destroy the wicked and evildoers, so that the strong should not harm the weak, so that I should rule over the black-headed people like Shamash or Shamash, and enlighten the land, to further the well-being of mankind. Hammurabi, the prince, called of Bel am I, making riches and increase, enriching the poor and Dorilu beyond compare. Sublime patron of it. You get it. He's very arrogant here. And it's really, I just think it's really fascinating to compare the difference when you look at the biblical version of this legal code. The laws between the Code of Hammurabi and the biblical code are strikingly similar. And it's interesting that there is a twisting, though, when it comes to how you see how life is valued very, very, very much in terms of godliness, that people should, there's like an aspect of justice that I personally believe it pervades the Hebrew Bible version of the legal code. Very interesting concepts, though, that we need to talk about. One thing is that the legal codes of ancient law are not in any way similar to the legal codes of modern law. We're going to be looking in our readings today of how important how would I say this? Sorry, I got distracted for a second because someone was, so you're, one second. I totally lost my place. Anyway, hold on a second. Oh yeah, it's cool. Sorry about that. That was like a weird brain fart because that was so weird. I totally lost my concentration. So, anyway, the legal code of ancient law is funny because when you look at the biblical version of what it takes for a judge to be appointed head over the land, I guess you could say the background of that person is that person has to be of sound character and a good family person and like all these types of things. But in modern legal codes, who becomes a judge? Well, you have had to have studied law for a long period of time. You have to know the letter of the law. All these things are very much part of our culture today. That was not what was the main part of the ancient law codes. It had to be people of sound moral character. Anyway, that's how we go with that. And another thing too is, now this one I did get from the Bible Project here, is there is not a single ancient, any extant thing that we have today. There is not a single ancient decree or decision or anything made that references the ancient law code. So what that means is, when you go to court today and they cite certain laws in lines of law saying, according to this law and this precedent and these things that happen, they did not do that in ancient law. So this is more like a general concept of so the ancient laws were more like a general concept of how one should comport oneself. But it has nothing to do with the actual decision. Well, I would say like it wasn't directly referenced when according to the various judgments that were made in ancient times. You can compare it to the many cultures; it just didn't happen, and so our perceptions have drastically changed over the millennia. Anyway, so okay, cool. Now, in the biblical account, laws are laws. You'll see what happens is it's a small amount of laws. The people rebel. The laws are added. The people rebel. Even more laws are added. Eventually, leading to where we get to 611/13, like of the Torah. And Torah doesn't necessarily mean law. It actually means something similar to instruction or admonition, teaching, and it's definitely not the concept of law that we have today. Although it is interesting that by Jesus' time, that law code became closer to a Roman version of law code. So it's very interesting when you compare it to that, because that's when you have the policing. I wouldn't say policing, but like how people should do whatever, and they criticize Jesus for doing various things that were against the law code in that sense, because they kind of made it that way over time, but it wasn't originally meant to be that way, that stringent, I guess, like legal code. And the reason why I'm saying that stringent legal code, this is very interesting here. In verse 20, in chapter 21, I'm looking here. There's a section. Is it chapter 21? Oh yeah. So verse 12 of chapter 21 says, anyone who assaults and kills another person must be put to death. Moses wasn't. And some can argue that this was before the legal code was instituted. Potentially. I could potentially see that, but if you're talking about God's unchanging characteristics, it doesn't really hold water. And when it's talking also about his chosen Israelite people, I can see that. There's also the concept too, and we're going to get into it. The preparation for the Passover meal changes from one book to the next. And if this is a stringent and unbending legal code, that wouldn't happen. And it would seem contradictory in nature. And there is also a concept of firstborn, but we'll get to that later in our reading. But there's a concept of the firstborn being God's alone, but yet how often did God not choose the firstborn? And he does it as well with David. So if you're saying that, if there is a legal code that wasn't in effect in the times of Genesis, cool. What about David? He was the runt of the family, and that firstborn was not the case with him. But yet, so it's interesting that there are that you have what the Torah says versus what God himself does. And if you want to make the argument, you could say in that instance, God didn't follow his own law. And it's and I think that it's not the point. In that case, there was a particular reason why he chose David. That law was compromised, and it was not meant to be this stringent thing. Jesus himself also said that. He was talking about who in the world wouldn't go into a trench to dig out an animal if it were hurting on the Sabbath. Like, you don't, like, there are compromises that are made in certain instances, and that's where true judgment comes from, and that's the point that's being made in terms of the Old Testament Torah, that true justice and true judgment, or balanced judgment, comes from the idea that certain compromises do take place. And so that's why it is erroneous to think that the ancient law code is stringent in that sense. Anyway. Okay, so that's all for that. Now, when it comes to the overall laws and the description of things, I'm not going to get into much detail of that. I will pinpoint certain ones, but I'm not going to get into much detail. There are certain things I do want to point out, though, regarding like how we don't quite notice things. And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper in a couple of areas. But on the overall law code, feel free to look at it yourself. But I have listened to the law code so many times. I know the value in the laws, like listening to them, why it's good to listen to them. But that's not the purpose of what we're going into here. And there are many resources where you can gladly, freely go and look into the reason why certain laws were very, very important at the time, or the concept of justice back then. So that's for some other study, some other time, or for your own personal study. So we're going to start jumping heavily now. Chapter 23, verses 15 and 16. So in chapter 23, verses 15 and 16, this is talking about the 3 annual festivals. Hold on. Yeah, actually, okay, I think, honestly, I'm not going to bring this one up. I'll just read it when I have pointed out, but we already talked about it. First, celebrate the festival of unleavened bread. For 7 days, the bread you eat must be made without yeast, just as I commanded you. Celebrate this festival annually at the appointed time in early spring in the month of Aviv. For that is the anniversary of your departure from Egypt, and may me appear before me without an offering. And second, celebrate the festival of harvest, when you bring me the first crops of your harvest. Finally, celebrate the festival of the final harvest at the end of the harvest season, when you have harvested all the crops on your fields. We did talk about this before. I actually don't know why I wrote it down for discussion today, so we'll just go ahead to the next one. Verse 20. See, I am sending an angel before you to protect you on your journey and lead you safely to the place I prepared for you. This is the angel, so this is, and actually it talks about like my angel in other areas too. So, and when he says my angel, this is quite technically the angel of the Lord. This is God himself. And it's interesting that he's talking about himself in the third person like this. I wonder who else talked about himself in the third person like this. But yes, we're getting into this is the distinction of how you have, like we talked before about the name, and we talked before about Yahweh himself. And then we talked before about this, is it the spirit of, or the angel of. And there's also sections where it talks about the spirit of as well. So that is a core thing there. So, all right. Anyway, so let's take a look here. Oh yeah, and I said another way of looking at verse 20 would be like, this is another way of saying, I will do this. So, like, this is, like, I myself will go before you. I will do these things. In chapter 24, Israel, it says, so yeah, chapter 24, this is 12 times 2 in terms of Exodus and importance in various chapters. So now we're in chapter 24, and this is when Israel accepts the covenant promise. So you notice the legal code only lasted a few short chapters in terms of this. And they accept What happens not much longer after this is the whole calf story. And then, bam, you got so many more laws. Anyway, so it was talking about me. I have verses 9 to 11 of note. Then Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel climbed up the mountain. There they saw the God of Israel. There they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet there seemed to be a surface of brilliant blue lapis lazuli, as clear as the sky itself. And though these nobles of Israel gazed upon God, he did not destroy them. In fact, they ate a covenant meal, eating and drinking in his presence. So it's interesting that he's taking on a form that is visible. And this blue lapis lazuli or sapphire comes back in prophets when they describe the visions that they have in terms of what they saw when they saw the Lord. And you have verses 16 to 18. And the glory of the Lord settled down on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. On the 7th day, the Lord called to Moses from inside the cloud. To the Israelites at the foot of the mountain, the glory of the Lord appeared at the summit like a consuming fire. Then Moses disappeared into the cloud as he climbed higher up the mountain. He remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And another thing, we're talking about numbers, right? And remember, I talked about the meaning of the burning bush. So in essence, Mount Sinai has become that burning bush. It's like exponentially larger, but the Sinai in terms of wordplay with the S and the N, and then you have the cloud like making billows, and it's almost like it was being consumed, but it wasn't being consumed. And this is God's presence, basically. It is interesting comparing the bush with, or the bushy tree with Mount Sinai, and also with the Garden of Eden. And this is where a lot of interesting imagery pops up. But we'll get more into that in other points, but this is really cool imagery. From chapters 35 to 31, it's mostly instruction. And where we're talking about but these instructions very highly reiterate the Eden principle of things. On your own free time, go ahead and read it, but there are certain things that are talking about like how a lampstand is made with 6 branches going out from the center stem, 3 on each side, or the altar of burnt offering. You have things like finely woven linen, looking here. There's so many things around here that really harken back to the Garden of Eden. So, we already talked about how 27 has 21 verses. Chapter 32. Chapter 32, verses 4 and 5. So, then Aaron took the gold, melted it down, and molded it into the shape of a calf. When the people saw it, they exclaimed, "O Israel, these are the gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt. These are the gods." And I think this is interesting. Aaron saw how excited the people were, so he built an altar in front of the calf. Then he answered, "Tomorrow will be a festival to Yahweh." So interesting that they are turning the gods principle. And yeah, it is definitely plural in the language used here. I did check it. But yet, Aaron says Yahweh as in a singular form. So it's interesting. It's like a very skewed concept of the multiple variety nature, the multiple variants of Yahweh. And I think that's interesting that I never actually noticed it before, that there was a distinction there between the plural and the singular. Verses 10 to 11. Now leave me alone, so my fierce anger can blaze against them, and I will destroy them. Then I will make you, Moses, into a great nation. So God was angry. He basically said, just go away. Don't even talk to me. And then Moses goes, it says, but Moses tried to pacify the Lord his God. Oh Lord, he said, why are you so angry with your own people who you brought up from the land of Egypt? And this is when he goes, don't even talk to me. And then you have Moses go, like, actually pushing into, like, this is a very strong indication of love, a strong indication of very, very firm friendship. When someone's in a bridal state and you really want to make sure of that person's well-being and you console and all of that. So Moses was consoling God, which is interesting. It's interesting because usually when you think about it from a modern perspective, that's not the role that God takes according to many modern perspectives. But here Moses is consoling him and comforting him and reminding him. And this is a very important thread that will continue throughout the rest of the biblical story. So, anyway, verse 29. Then Moses told the Levites, today you have ordained yourselves for the servants of the Lord. For you obeyed him even though it meant killing your own sons and brothers. Today you have earned a blessing. And actually, wait. Yeah, so it is interesting that this is an example of how these priest-like people who went through and killed those who were closest to them, how much God meant to them. And this is an intense section. A lot of modern readers have a problem with it, but we're talking about an ancient way of looking at things. And the fact that, remember how Christ himself says, you have to leave your closest ones behind. You have to, in comparison to your love for the Lord, you have to hate your father and mother and your brother and your sister. You have to hate them, in a sense. But here it was physical in that sense where they trusted and they believed and they listened to the guidance provided them. So. Verses 32 to 35. But now, if you will only forgive their sin, but if not, this is Moses talking, erase my name from the record you have written. So this is, again, more of an example of the loving bond between Yahweh and Moses. And how it's like the Lord's like, I'm gonna destroy them, and Moses is like, don't, he's like, and remember your promise, not in that consoling nature. And no, I'm really gonna destroy them. And Moses is like, well, if you're gonna destroy them, you're gonna destroy me too. Basically, I love that. I think it's really cool. So anyway, verses 33 to 35. But the Lord replied to Moses, no, I will erase the name of everyone who has sinned against me. Now go, lead the people to the place I told you about. Look, my angel, I will lead the way before you. And when I come to call the people to account, I will certainly hold them responsible for their sins. Then the Lord sent a great plague upon the people because they had worshipped the calf Aaron had made. So it's really interesting here that he goes, I will send my angel before you. He's talking about himself. And the same exact, but in a different aspect. This is already paving the way for when Jesus was talking to the Father. Like, it's God. But in that weird sense, that it's the same thing that we are presented with in Exodus as well. Even as far back as Genesis. That's another thing. Anyway. Okay, chapter 33, verse 5. For the Lord had told Moses to tell them, you are a stubborn and rebellious people. If I were to travel with you for even a moment, I would destroy you. Remove your jewelry and fine clothes while I decide what to do with you. This just reminds me of when like a couple finds out that one side had been cheating. And it's like that supreme anger that can take the other side of the couple there. So let's just say a woman let's just say the woman, just for ease, has gone and committed adultery, which is what Israel is equated to as a woman here. and committed adultery with another man. So then you have the man getting super angry about that, and just like, just take off all that stuff, go away, and I'll figure out what we're going to do from here. And it can happen the same way around as well, with like a woman doing the same thing with a man who is cheated. But it's a very similar way. God is looking at Israel as his life to cling to. And this is Israel turning against him. This is the imagery that is brought up in Ezekiel 16 and 23 as well. So this is very, very, he's stilted here. It's not good. And so in verse 7, it was Moses' practice to take the tent of meeting and set it up some distance from the camp. Everyone who wanted to make a request of the Lord will go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And then inside the tent of meeting, verse 11, inside the tent of meeting, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Afterward, Moses will return to the camp, but the young man who assisted him, Joshua son of Nun, would remain behind in the tent of meeting. Verses 12 to 20, and then you have how Moses sees the Lord's glory from his the end of the chapter. And like Moses is so emphatically in love with God, and goes, I just want to see you for once. And God said, well, if you see my fullness, you're going to die. And so this is the first time that the actual essence of everything God is passes before someone. And this is like, and the text itself is rather clear. But it is a very powerful moment. And in a sense, when he did this, and later on, what happens is he comes down and his face is glowing, and and the people are afraid of him because it's like he himself has become Yahweh on earth, which is how he was viewed among the people as well as the people of Egypt. So anyway, so in verses 6 to 7 of chapter 34, the Lord passed in front of Moses calling out. So this is when it happened. Notice that it's verses 6 and 7 of chapter 34. So anyway, it's interesting to me. But this is the moment. Yahweh, the Lord, the God of compassion and mercy. I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. I lavish unfailing love to 1,000 generations. I forgive iniquity, rebellion, and sin, but I do not excuse the guilty. I lay the sins of parents upon their children and grandchildren. The entire family is affected, even children in the 3rd and 4th generation. I want to show you one thing that I think it's clear what's being said here. I'm not going to go into it. There's so much discussion that has gone into it by other scholars, and it's a very clear statement. I am, though, going to show something of note because it has become a discussion in previous times that we met. So notice that it says slow to anger. It's erech, and then you have abayim. And so the word abayim, let's go ahead and click on that. It means a nostril, nose, or anger. Interesting, but a nostril typically. So the word here is pluralized. So notice, actually what it is two noses, so two nostrils. So you have long nostrils. And the word means long here. It says slow, but it actually means length. When I was studying it, it does absolutely, I don't know why it keeps saying so here. Patient, long, there we go, long. And the actual word means long, but the idiom, long nostrils, means slow to anger because how long it takes for the nose to get hot. Another way of saying anger in Hebrew is burning nose, or just nose itself can mean anger. Now, I did want to show you something here as we're now looking at the interlinear. Notice that, oh, my goodness, where in the world is the colon? I don't see one. Oh, yeah. Do you see any colon? Oh, there we go. At the end of that. So remember when I said that it's verses 6 and 7? Well, wait a second. How many do you see here? This is where they don't line up. So how many verses are there in total? You got 34, right? Oh, wait, no. 35 verses, but 34 colons. And notice where there isn't a colon at the end of 6. So all of this is considered the sixth distinction. So this is a very, very long verse. So I just thought that was interesting to show that. Oh, and cancellation marks. See that straight line below that Y-looking thing? That's a cancellation mark. Another one is that curve here. Another one is that upside down U over here. This is directions in how to read it through cancellation, which is fascinating to me. That's something that was part of the Masoretic text. And so, all right, that is, let me just finish Exodus here. Maybe we'll get through Leviticus, I don't know. But let me just finish what I have here for Exodus. Then you have verses 8 to 35, which is, come on. It's like he jumps up on the ground, worships, and then the Lord here in verse 10 says, listen. I'm making a covenant with you in the presence of all your people. I'll perform miracles that have never been performed anywhere in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people around you will see the power of the Lord, the awesome power of this display. But listen carefully to everything I command you today. Then I will go ahead of you and drive out the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Notice, I will go ahead of you and drive them out. Be very careful never to make a treaty with the people who live in the land where you're going. If you do, you'll follow their evil ways and be trapped. Instead, you must break down their pagan altars, smash their sacred pillars, and cut down their Asherah poles. We talked about Asherah before. So it's interesting. In ancient records, Asherah is considered one of Yahweh's consorts. Or actually, a consort of Yahweh, and also a consort of El, and also a consort of Baal. But it's interesting. Here you do see the competition that God has against Asherah, and later on you'll see it against Baal. And because these are considered part of the divine council that have twisted things to meet their own needs. This is very much iterated in Deuteronomy as well, but we're not there. So anyway. So we have like all this, you must not make people do. Verse 16, then you will accept their daughters who sacrifice to other gods as wives for your sons, and they will seduce your sons to commit adultery against me by worshiping other gods. Like I said, he used Israel as his real Asherah. We talked about this before in another thing. It's like Asherah was established as his consort, but he in the biblical way of saying things, he said, no, you are my consort, and you are my wife. Like this is a huge thing. You must not make any gods of metal for yourselves. And it keeps going, and it talks about like all these things. You can read it for yourself. But this is where there are more law codes being established right now because of them committing adultery with that golden calf. Anyway, so in 36, and like this the inference is also the sexual adultery that's happening before the calf. That's an inference. I believe it states. I would have to go back and look. let me just check it real quick. There's a section where I do believe that it was talking about how they would have rampant sex. And that is where it was before the calf. And remember, Aaron said, "This is a day for Yahweh," and this is not in God's plan whatsoever. And he gets angry, and righteously so. But anyway, so 36. This is when the tabernacle is being established. You remember we were talking about the importance of 12 plus 12 plus 12. So in chapter 12, you have the Passover. Chapter 24, you have Israel accepts the covenant. In chapter 34, you have, 36, the establishment of the tabernacle. And then you have all the building requirements and stuff like that. More Eden imagery here. And then in chapter 40, it's finished. In 40, it basically it shows the splendor of the tabernacle. And then the beginning of Leviticus is when God speaks from the tabernacle. And so I think that's where we're going to stop for now. I'm going to take a few minute break, and we'll come back in a few. So, all right. All right, we're back. All right, guys. We are now in Leviticus. And this is a really interesting, an interesting book when you come into like the legal code of things. But I do want to only just touch on a few things. My list for what we're presenting is not too large. So first of all, we have Leviticus 1:1. The Lord God called to Moses from the tabernacle and said to him. Oh, cool. That's a very weird place to end a verse. Let's take a look at the interlinear, shall we? So Leviticus. Oh, I wonder if we can count how many words are in this verse. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, wait. Oh, I'm sorry. This is not the one. Okay, never mind. This is not the one I was talking about. Never mind. That totally happened sometime else. I thought that was why I put that down there. Anyway, no, what actually, this is just him, God calling from this is just him calling from the tent of meeting and actually speaking from his presence, speaking from. Anyway, chapter 10, verses 1 to 7. So, hold on, chapter 10. I actually have a physical Bible, so it's taking me a second. Chapter 10, verses 1 to 7. Wait a second. This is an interesting thing here. Notice that if your Bibles probably have some sort of like subheading, right? Notice how long that subheading runs for. 7 verses. And this has to do with the sin of Nadab and Abihu. Who do not do things the way that the Lord has prescribed, and that is absolutely part of the that's like this is God basically saying you have to do the preparations, the cleaning ceremonies, the purification rites. All these things have to be done, and the reason why they're obliterated is because they can't approach God's presence without being obliterated, without having done the proper purification ceremonies. This is the only way that God is able to actually interact with them on that level. And yes, you have him appearing in physical form, but like this is talking about his genuine essence, allowing them to approach, to draw near, which is a very common aspect of what we're going to be what we talked about. So hold on one sec. I'm just recalibrating my video feed here. Anyway, so that's it's a very interesting. It's very interesting though that this sin that took place covers the span of 7 verses, so it is a very unfortunate sin, but it's also declaring God's divinity when it comes to the number 7 here. There is debate on the rest of the chapter, but in terms of number play, I'm not going to present it, but there's an interesting about number play there. Then you have verses 19 to 20. Then Aaron answered Moses. Yes.
My understanding was the reason why they were devoured is because they offered strange fire. And you were talking about...
The strange fire was actually not being performed in the way that was prescribed. So they were going contrary to what they were told to do. And yes, the strange fire is potentially the fire that you would expect another god to receive. I've heard that before, but it's very clear that the biblical text is saying God did not prescribe this type of fire to be presented to him in this way. So that was that's absolutely the case. So, but
all right,
yes?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I just was curious.
Okay, no, I didn't know if you had anything else to add to that, because I know you've studied the laws quite a bit. So it's interesting to present you with it. Anyway, so verses 19 to 20. Then Aaron ordered Moses, "Today my sons presented both their sin offering and their burnt offering to the Lord, and yet this tragedy has happened to me. If I had eaten the people's sin offering on such a tragic day as this, would the Lord have been pleased?" And when Moses heard this, he was satisfied. I thought that was just very interesting that, you have, once again, the discussion was, why didn't you do this? Well, I did this because of this. What would that have been a good thing if I didn't do this? And there was, it's almost like when we were talking about the compromise aspect before. It's like, well, you've got to go, according to, these things, but then there's also relenting as well happening. It happens, it does happen quite a bit in the scriptures. But so if we're going back to the concept of, strict law code, there is that aspect of appeasing as well. So, all right. So chapter 16. Okay. So I'll just say this: in chapter 16, you have the concept of lots being done, but yet it also says things like don't look for spirits and don't perform divination, or don't look at fortune telling, or divination and fortune telling are grouped into one. So it's interesting that God says, but lots are okay. This is once again a distinction between the divination of other cultures versus the divination of Yahweh, because Yahweh does allow for divination. It's just not for other gods. It is I am the one that will provide you with divination. You do lots in this way. The ephod, all these things. This is a form of God's divination. And so in the fortune telling, same thing happens with David. When David references the ephod, and God says yeah, this will happen to you if you do this. And that's exactly, to me, I think it's interesting that the Bible's not saying that all forms of divination or all forms of, for example, numerology, or that all forms of, magicianship. I mean, think about it. When you have, Moses or Aaron throwing down the staff, that was magical, what happened before Pharaoh. Or that all forms are evil. It's just in what ways are they being used, and through what means are they being used. And this is the distinction here with Leviticus. And then you also have Azazel. It's interesting that it's just that the goat is given up to Azazel. And it's funny because Azazel is potentially the name of another god. It's also potentially the name for the scapegoat. It's interesting. No one really knows what Azazel means. So I just wanted to present that there's a lot of study on it. No one really agrees on what Azazel actually means concerning the Day of Atonement. And but the two major theories are Azazel is the name of a god that had dominion over that particular land, and that the goat that was put out there would be for that being to devour. The second one was that the word for goat is similar to the Oz section of Azazel, and then Azel is closer to the concept of diversion or something. I forget exactly the technical term, but it's so you have the goat of diversion or the scapegoat.
So it's interesting that no one really has consensus on that, and I did want to present that.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Concerning the Azazel goat and the Day of Atonement, my understanding was the sins of Israel were put on the Azazel goat, and it was sent out into the wilderness. And the other goat was sacrificed, and people have suggested that it might have been the goat that was sacrificed was that of Christ, and the sins of the people are put on Satan, or the Satan, and he was a representative of that. Just thought it would be of note there.
I see the correlation. The only point where I would say that is that the sins were put on Satan himself,
because he was responsible for.
I have to ponder that one because God also goes against. If you're talking about like the fallen divinity aspect, like with the serpent talking, and the curse was put on the serpent, I can see that. I can see where you're going with that. So go ahead. What were you saying?
It was just a symbolic type of thing. It was basically that sins people that. We're in a sinful state because of Satan or and the diversions and stuff like that. It wasn't totally our fault, but we do take the blame, and Christ takes on that blame, and we're forgiven because of it. But it's also Satan holds some responsibility to it as well.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because I kind of pick and choose when I introduce Jesus into certain concepts. And it's funny because I was going to talk more about the scapegoat whenever we did get into the New Testament, but it is cool that we're mentioning it now.
The thing is that he was the sacrifice, and goats and sheep were allowed.
Absolutely.
Right?
No, I was just saying it's funny because I think I was just laughing at the idea that I decided not to mention Christ in this particular section. And then here you are bringing it up, and I'm like, well, okay, I guess that's where it was supposed to go in the first place.
All right, I'll shut up.
No, I'm not. I don't think you understand what I'm saying. I'm actually saying that, like, when I decided not to mention it, and you brought it up anyway, I was like, okay, maybe it was supposed to be brought up. I don't know. So, I think that was fun. Yep.
Okay, I'll be quiet.
You were what?
I'll be quiet.
No, I didn't mean that.
No, I'm saying so you can move on. Okay, I was just bringing that up as a point. That's all.
If you had something else that you wanted to bring, it sounded like you had something else to bring.
No, I was just saying I'm going on mute.
Okay, cool. All right, so chapter 17. Oh, but yes, the whole concept of Christ being the scapegoat, not the scapegoat, the sacrifice one. Yes, absolutely. The concept of the 7 holidays, of the 7 holy times, absolutely goes into the concept of Christ. That's what I was going to talk about at some other point in time. But yes, you have everything there with the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread and then the Feast of First Fruits. And there's very much a very Christian element to this as well. And that comes across very clearly as Scripture moves on. So yes, the scapegoat aspect would be how the sins were placed into the wilderness. And there's a talk on that as well. But that Christ himself was sacrificed, the sacrifice portion, where that died in our stead. But anyway, okay, chapter 17, verse 7. The people must no longer be unfaithful to the Lord by offering sacrifices to the goat idols. This is a permanent law for them to be observed from generation to generation. So they are worshiping spirits related to goats, like many cultures did. Like, think of the Egyptians, who would worship alligators and cats and jackals. And so you had similar things happening among the Israelites, and God said, don't let them do this anymore. And this is definitely a remnant of when they were coming from Egypt. And this is really interesting that he says, okay, like, have them stop doing that. Like, it's been long enough. The people must no longer be unfaithful to the Lord by offering sacrifices. There's a reason why it's called no longer. They were doing it for quite a long time. I thought it was interesting. And it is interesting, and it comes back to, like, okay, so it's been long enough, stop. Anyway, verses 10 to 14. And if any native Israelite or foreigner living among you eats or drinks blood in any form, I will turn against that person and cut him off from the community of your people. For the life of the body is in its blood. I've given you the blood on the altar to purify you, making you right with the Lord. It is the blood given in exchange for a life that makes purification possible. That is why I have said to the people of Israel, you must never eat or drink blood, neither you nor the foreigners living among you. And if any native Israelite or foreigner living among you goes hunting and kills an animal or bird that is approved for eating, he must drain its blood and cover it with earth. The life of every creature is in its blood. That is why I have said to the people of Israel, you must never eat or drink blood, because the life of any creature is in its blood. So whoever consumes blood will be cut off from the community. And it's true even in modern concepts as well. You don't have blood, you will die. Like your life essence is in your blood. It's really interesting that perception is a very strong one. Don't eat blood, because that's the symbol of the life that was lost in order for you to consume it. It's a very powerful statement, and it comes into play in Numbers when they eat the animals with the blood still in them. In 19:1, the Lord also said to Moses, oh, this is it. This is it. Okay, so we're talking about the holiness and personal conduct. Okay, cool. So the Lord also said to Moses, and this happens a lot. I only picked a few here and there to display it. One, two, three, four. Nope, that's not it. Why did I put verse 1 there? Okay, the Lord also said to Moses. Oh, that's why I said it. Once again, I kind of failed at my own thing there. I can't decipher my notes sometimes. The Lord also said to Moses, give the following instruction to the entire community of Israel. You must be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. This is the implication here, is that God himself is holy, and Israel is being viewed as a kingdom of priests, of kingly priests. And so God is saying, you're holy because of that. I am holy. I chose you. By nature of that, you are holy. You have no choice in this matter. You're instantaneously holy because the Holy of Holies has chosen you to set you apart, which is the definition of holy. So that's the very core concept here. In verse 7, if any of the sacrifice is eaten on the third day, it will be contaminated, and I will not accept it. It's interesting that it says on the third day. This is also the ground, and I will mention Jesus here. This is also the ground for the big debate on what day Jesus was killed, because you had you have that third day. Well, on the third day, what happened on the first day? And it's like you count 2 days, and that's the third day. But wait a second, if it says 3 days and 3 nights, how does that? It's interesting. I just wanted to point that out for a second. That there is a weird way or a different way of calculating days. So that's one thing to present there. In verses 11 and 12, do not steal. Oh, but I just think it was interesting on the third day the food spoiled. Not spoiled, but was contaminated, was not deemed clean anymore. Because it didn't last the full 3 days, which I thought was very interesting.
That's because they didn't have refrigeration back then.
Right? No, I think it's making a point that this will not cover your sins for all time. And this does not have the ability to cover your sins for all time. So on the third day it's spoiled, but yet Christ didn't. So it's interesting, that correlation there. By the way, All right, sorry, verses 11 and 12. Do not steal. Do not deceive or cheat one another. Do not bring shame on the Lord of your God by using it to swear falsely. I am the Lord. And it's funny, that's part of the Ten Commandments. Clear repetitions here. A little bit more clear in terms of language, but this is repetition. It's a clear repetition with slight nuances. And there's also going to be more repetition with large differences between the two versions of the law, such as what we're going to come back to regarding the Passover meal. That will come later. But it is fascinating looking at these things being very repetitious. You would think that in a normal modern day law code that all these repetitions would be unnecessary because it was already stated in some statute under article whatever of whatever section whatever. And here it's like that clearly didn't matter. It was more like the emphasis of things mattered. And so anyway, verses 23 to 26. When you enter the land and plant fruit trees, leave the fruit unharvested for the first 3 years and consider it forbidden. Do not eat it. In the 4th year, the entire crop must be consecrated to the Lord as a celebration of praise. Finally, in the 5th year, you may eat the fruit. If you follow this pattern, your harvest will increase. I am the Lord your God. Do not eat meat that has not been drained of its blood. Interesting that, like, you're talking about the fruit trees, and this is how this plenty will come. And it's an interesting that it's for 3 years that you don't eat of it. But it does also make logical sense. But I think it's beautiful that the implication is to try to get you back into that garden imagery and don't eat meat drained that has not been drained of its blood. And then verse 31. Do not defile yourselves by turning to mediums or those who consult the spirit of the dead. I am the Lord your God. It's interesting that don't go to mediums, but the high priests were considered intermediary figures between the people and the Lord. And then you have the spirits of the dead, which is quite clearly what surrounding cultures did. Strangely enough, Hebrew culture didn't, and I think that's very interesting. That it was not a prescribed way of dealing with things. It wasn't ancestor worship, and that was a very common theme in surrounding cultures, like, for example, China, where they would act as, like, in China, for example, what they would do is, so say, like, a beloved one died, usually a father. The firstborn son would be expected on a yearly ritual to go to the father's grave, set up like a scene, almost like a theater scene, and act like the father, as if the father's spirit had possessed the son, and the father was able to live on earth for that one day. That is an amazing facet of culture that we don't have in our culture, and I think it's a value to iterate how some cultures did do things and do things. China no longer does this, but they still have this tomb sweeping ceremony, and they have this thing where they are respectful to the ones who have passed, and the spirits that can can eat food and that type of stuff. And it's interesting. Hebrew culture distinctly does not do that. That is rare among ancient cultures, which once again makes them holy and makes them unique. So anyway, verses 33 to 34. Do not take advantage of foreigners who live among you in your land. Treat them like native born Israelites and love them as you love yourself. Remember that you were once foreigners living in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. It's interesting how much is being repeated. I am the Lord your God. I am the Lord your God. I am the Lord your God. So anyway, by the way, when talking about the foreigner aspect of things, this was clearly diluted, and this was clear, not clearly, but quickly. I meant to say quickly. It was quickly diluted, where foreigners were not treated that way. I think it's also unfortunately, I don't often reference modern times, but I do think that's a lesson that we ourselves should learn as modern individuals. When we look at people of other cultures and things like that, I think that this is a few verses we can take in our own lives as well. when it comes to treating people with respect. But anyway, it's something that I just see all the time, and it's something that was also very popular then. You're not one of us. You're not one of our bloodline, so you're of lesser value. It's a very common thing that has happened throughout all of world history. And God said, don't do this. This is something that other countries, you look throughout history. It's just the common thread. And even in our modern day American society. And you look at, but you look at what God says, and he says, you were once slaves in the land of Egypt. And when you think of it in terms of Christianity, all of us were in bondage to sin. So don't treat others who are still bound to sin with contempt. So anyway, I thought that was very beautiful when you look at it through the lens of Exodus and then through later Christianity. Chapter 20, verse 6. I will also turn against those who commit spiritual prostitution by putting their trust in mediums or in those who consult the spirits of the dead. I will cut them off from the community. It's interesting that he refers to it as prostitution. And there is a strong, and it is being used with very strong sexual language, that you could say like of God looking at Israel as a wife figure, just like with the bride of Christ and Christ himself. Get that? Yes? I don't hear you. Oh, I hope we're not encountering technical difficulties like we did an hour ago. Well, I'll continue. So, all right, so let's go ahead. And we'll just go ahead here. So chapter 21, verses 7 and 9. So set yourselves apart to be holy, for I am the Lord your God. So that's, again, the reiteration of the holy statement there. And then in verse, that's chapter 20. I meant chapter 21, verse 7. Priests may not marry a woman defiled by prostitution, and they may not marry a woman who is divorced from her husband. For the priests are set apart as holy to their God. So this is where, so it's interesting that like prostitution here, by the whole, if the holy priests were to have daughters into prostitution, that would defile the whole line there. It's interesting though when you think of Jesus coming in. Of course, this is of course not having anything to do with the high priest, but how Jesus comes over and dares to touch a prostitute, or dares to save, to actually care about one, because they were considered the lowest of the low. So this is Jesus bringing back into the justice realm of things all of that entire. I think you know what I'm saying. And then also in verse 9, if a priest's daughter defiles herself by becoming a prostitute, she also defiles her father's holiness, and she must be burned to death. And it's interesting too that like when Jesus came across a prostitute, it did not say that prostitute was the daughter of a holy priest, but it is indicative that the compromise made there was that he decided to save her instead of burn her, which would have been expected of the Messiah in a sense. Like when you're talking about the consuming fire aspect, or for example with leprosy, they were excluded from certain events, and so here Jesus is bending down and touching the leper. It's not, and the leper not being obliterated as a result. So that is interesting. I don't know. Hold on one second. All right, cool. All right, so chapter 23. There are 7 appointed times of holiness. And all of these, and I said, like, all of these have also Christian references as well. So if we're talking about Passover, well, that's like around the time when Christ died at the Passover. That's the unleavened bread aspect from the communion, the wine, the Last Supper, all of that stuff. The celebration of the first harvest, that's when the Spirit fell upon the apostles. Then you have the Festival of Harvest, which is when there's like the, hold on one second. I'm sorry, the Festival of First Harvest. Sorry, that's like during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but then you have like the presentation of things like I think, was this the Waving of the Sheep Day? But all of them have their Christian version of things. When you have the trumpet, you can think of the trumpet calls. When you have atonement, I'm just simplifying everything right now. Atonement comes back to like when we are purified. In that sense, our sins are taken away. When you look at the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Shelters, this is when this is really kind of like the marriage ceremony that is often referenced in these temporary dwellings. And then you have the last great day as well. These are all massive, like huge points. Actually, the last great day. Okay, wait, I'm just going through my history. So you got the and you got the harvest. Good, and that's what we just have with Shavuot. We would have atonement, trumpet.
What are you counting the days?
Yeah, I'm counting. Yeah, so the feast
first day of unleavened bread, last day is unleavened bread is a holy day. That's 2. Pentecost is a holy day. Feast of Trumpets a holy day. Day of Atonement's a holy day. First day of Tabernacles is a holy day, and the last great day is a holy day. That's 7.
What about Pentecost?
I already said Pentecost. First day of unleavened bread, last day of unleavened bread, Pentecost. Feast of Trumpets. Feast of or the Day of Atonement. First day of Trumpets, first day of Tabernacles, sorry, and the last great day of the feast.
Okay.
That's 7.
Well, because like the celebration of First Harvest is
Pentecost. I believe that's referring to Pentecost.
Okay.
Because
okay,
the harvest, during the Feast of Passover is when the beginning of the harvest was allowed to be taken, but that wasn't until the Sunday within the feast when the wave sheaf was offered, and then after
that's what
that
I thought it was.
That's
what
allowed
I was
to start
harvesting.
Yeah, that's something a little different, but yes.
No, I mixed my words up. I'm sure I came across unclearly, but that's what I didn't mean. That the waving would have done with the first harvest. Yeah, and that has to do with like when Christ died. He was like symbolically the waving there.
Right. In fact, there's a story about when the women tried to stop him. He says, "No, hold on, mate. I still haven't ascended to my Father." And that was on Sunday morning, and then about at 9 o'clock in the morning was when the wave sheaf was offered, and the concept was that he was in heaven at that time, being accepted as a sacrifice and inauguration or whatever you want to call it.
Right. He was also physical. And in the actual, and know this until later, that the word actually being used, and thank you, Matt, if you are watching this, to like the word that's being used is more like cling to. Don't hold on
cling
so
to
tightly
me. Yes, don't cling to me. I have not. Right, but he was like.
Right.
The point, but why did he actually say, "I still have to"? Yeah, but he was.
What?
But his response to her was, "I still have not ascended to my Father."
Yeah, and I was just adding that extra layer as well that I thought was interesting. It's like a lot of people think that he means "don't touch me," but no, he's saying you can't hold on to me like this because I have to do stuff.
Right, I got to be someplace. I'll be back tonight. Right. It's like, listen, I'll see you guys tonight at dinner. I have to go to see my dad right now. Yeah.
And I love that aspect of it. But, all right, I do want to get done with. Let's see if we can get done with Leviticus. Hopefully we can. And if not, I'm okay with that. So, chapter 24, verses 10 to 23. One day, a man. 20 to 23. This is the example of just punishment. And it goes all the way about like some guy who blasphemed the name of the Lord. And here, what it was the implication is that when he cursed the name of the Lord, he actually equated himself to God, a God. Because what happened was, in the equating process, for him to be able to curse the name of the Lord, so him uttering a curse has put him on an equal playing field with God. So that was the blaspheming nature. And that is, so that's when God said, you cannot do that. And he was put to death. It's interesting, though, when Moses blasphemes God and he acts like God himself, God doesn't kill him. He just says you can't enter the land. So it's interesting on who gets these punishments. It's because quite clearly the person in chapter 24 is not having any sense of close unity with God. And here Moses slipped up, and God said, "I love you to death," but unfortunately you can't. That's pun not intended. I love you to death, but I love you so deeply. But because of you blaspheming me, I cannot allow you into. I think it's clear the difference here. And God, I remember the Bible Project talked about how it's not that God has unconditional love; it's unconditioned. And I thought that was really an interesting way of looking at it, because it's if you're not looking for Him, God He laments it, but that unconditional love, really just. There's a difference when it comes to when you're looking for Him and you slip up and God just embraces you and says, it's okay, get back on that horse, keep moving forward. That love is unconditioned. And it's really interesting. It's clear the difference here as well in Exodus. So anyway, that was up to 23. Okay. Chapter 25. Oh, we finally got to the first verse word count thing. Okay. So chapter 25 is the Sabbath year. So the first verse, finally, we got to it. Oh my goodness. I thought it was funny how I missed it twice. The Sabbath year in chapter 25. Look at the number of words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7. And this is talking about the Sabbath right here. It's really amazing. So wait a second. I'm just checking here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, this one has nothing to do. It's really interesting that the very first verse indeed does have 7 words. And notice it doesn't always happen. I'm not trying to force a number out of something that doesn't exist. It really is indicative of what does truly exist here. So it's fascinating. And notice, too, that the description of the Sabbath year lasts for how many verses? Oh, yeah, 7, because the year of Jubilee begins in verse 8. And I mentioned before how the rest of another chapter has a debatable numerical meaning. I didn't mean that chapter. I meant this chapter. There's a debatable numerical meaning in this chapter when it comes to the year of Jubilee. I'm not going to get into it, but there's some weirdness about there being 48 verses left in the chapter and blah blah blah. But you have the year of Jubilee being the 50th. Anyway, there's a concept there. I don't feel comfortable going into detail with it, so I'm not presenting it as absolute truth. But I think it is interesting. Some of the numerical plays going on there. Chapter 26, verse 2, and I did say to myself to show the interlinear. So let's see why. Because after I put these notes on, I kind of forgot why I had them in the first place. Talking about the Sabbath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So chapter 26, verse 2. Is when it says in my translation, it says, you must keep my Sabbath days of rest and show reverence for my sanctuary. I'm the Lord. And it is interesting that it is certainly 7 words long. That's all I got for the book of Leviticus. I don't know if it's worth delving into numbers. I will say this, though, about numbers. The whole patterning thing of the amount that was in the census and the numerical values, there are debates on what these numbers mean. And I would just say based on what we already covered in terms of numerical values of things, they are there. There is some debate, but I think it's clear that by now, when there's a number listed, especially an important number, that there's meaning behind it. And so, I think it's an interesting thing to mention. I am pulling myself back, though, because there is a precipice there. But it is interesting when you look at the numerical value of things, and numbers certainly plays into that. Yes, Dad?
Well, I would think numbers would, because that's the name of the book, isn't it?
That's not the original name of the book.
I know, but they called it that because there were so many numbers in it, and they were counting constantly.
Exactly, yes, and they were.
Okay, I got to go on mute. My phone's ringing.
What? What? It's funny how my Bible does it. I'll show my Bible, which is the New Living Translation, and they actually have it in charts. I thought that was interesting. But it's cool. But yeah, there's number play going on. It's clear. It's obvious. Maybe we'll do a couple more things real quick. I have to leave in about 5 minutes or so, but let's see if I can show anything before we go. Maybe we'll do chapter. You know what? Yeah, we'll do it. Chapter 5, verse 17 to 28. Looking here. Oh yeah, this is more aspect of divination here, right? This whole thing about taking the clay jar, pouring on her hands, doing the sacrament, this ritual, her saying all this stuff. This is what we would consider, looking back at that, as some sort of divination. That is divination. That whole section with the seeing if the woman was impure or not. And the last thing I will show, because I do actually have to rush after this, is chapter 10, verse 11. And you have, in the second year after Israel's departure from Egypt, on the 20th day of the second month, the cloud lifted from the tabernacle of the covenant. This is when things, the beginning of the migration period happened. And it's fascinating, what happens after this. I think this is a good place to stop, too, because this is when you got the basis for this legal code, and then the cloud lifted and moved. And I think this is how we're going to end it. So any comments before I go? I actually have to be out of here really soon. So any pressing comments, and then after that we can cover things next week.
Nothing pressing, but I think it's always an interesting here that that whole section that we just went through took over a year. It was a whole year.
Yeah.
They were in this sitting camped on outside of Mount Sinai and going through all those things. Anyway, interesting. You don't think about it in those terms, but can you imagine camping outside that mountain for a year and everything that went on?
Yeah, that would have been. I think that it's jarring. Cause I can also understand, and I'm going to put some humanity into the Israelites here. A lot of people just use disdain when talking about the Israelites, but come on, a year. I think anyone would have started to get slightly agitated, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I don't think they were any different than any other group of people in the same circumstances.
Right, and that's what God says actually is, hey, you're nothing special. You're really nothing special. I just decided to use you. Okay, I'll mention this, because I just checked my schedule. I do have a little bit more time. I'll just say this. I'm reiterating the fact of God saying, you are my chosen portion. He has allocated, remember, all the way back in Genesis, he's allocated the world back in Babel to the other gods. But yet he says, you are the one for me. This is why it says, I am the Lord. Remember back in, I meant to say this too, huge thing, Exodus 34, when he says, I am Yahweh, the God, like the Yahweh is one, Yahweh alone. That means you worship me and no one else. That's the actual meaning of it. It doesn't mean that there's only one God. It means you worship me. We have this partnership. You do not prostitute yourself to other gods. And that is the core and underlying theme that is presented here. So, all right, that's all I got. Anything else before we go? Okay, let's go ahead and give it to the Lord here. Wow. Thank you, Father, for keeping this active. Regardless of the technical difficulties, regardless of the things going on, we just thank you for allowing us to blast through the rest of Exodus and all the way through Leviticus, and now we're in the middle of Numbers. Father, we just ask that that as we ponder the things that we have seen tonight and heard about tonight, that you give us a hand of peace and grace and understanding when we start to digest these things. May we continue to walk forward in confidence and ever in closer love with you, the more that your truth is revealed in these passages. We thank you for having shown, I thank you personally for showing me, it's like a key, having studying Hebrew, like a key unlocking so many things here. And I love the fact that we can share in this together. Father, we just ask a hand of peace upon all who are part of this study that are present here tonight as well as not present tonight. We ask a hand of rest as well upon all whom we know. And we just thank you for keeping this meeting going strong. We put ourselves before you. We grasp you ever tighter, and we cling to you as you cling to us. Thank you for this chance at life, and we come to you with eternal thanks. In the name of Jesus Christ, humbly pray.
Amen.
So, all right.